Welcome to lesson 2 of the Swift fundamentals. In the last lesson, you've learned why we use optional, and then we learned how to convert them to normal types to work with each other. However, you may have wondered why those question mark and exclamation mark, those bang sign, automatically appear when you try to access a property or method of an object. If you've never done it before, that's okay. The goal of this lesson is to prevent you from guessing around. Let us find out what goes under the hood.
Welcome to Optional Chainings. Here's a problem statement. Why do I see a question mark and exclamation mark when accessing methods and properties? By the way, if you don't know what methods and properties are, this is not the right course for you. Again, in the part of the prerequisite, you need to know what the basics of object or programming, what it means to initialize an object. Okay, so here's an example from the UI kit framework. You definitely need to have a little bit of experience with iOS development. You don't have to know, but it's a good idea to know the iOS ecosystem, such as view controllers. Anyway, so we're gonna initialize this UI label, and then let's get the property highlighted text color. But all of a sudden, you see this weird question mark that appears out of nowhere, and you get CG color property again. But why is it happening in the first place? And if you have ever wondered in the past, now you don't need to guess. All right, you're gonna find out why this is occurring, and let's try to replicate the feature. Let's try to make this happen in the first place. So what is going on in the first place? So I'm going to create a designer class called human. It contains one property called name and also one method called say hello. Okay, so it's nice and simple, just like that. We have a human class, and again, you need to know what it means to initialize a property. Okay, if you're not, this is not the right course. Please go to the YouTube channel. My YouTube channel, you have free access to introduction to object-oriented programming. You know what it means to use properties and methods, and I'm sure most of you guys have gone through that prerequisite. And I'm not gonna mention that this is an intermediate Swift course. Okay, I'm not gonna mention again. I assume you guys already know these things. Okay, so we have this human class, and then we are going to design another class called apartment. And if you know apartment contains a human property, right? Every apartment, there should be a dog or there should be a person living there. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. And in this apartment class, there's a property called human, and the type is humans. That means you have to initialize with a human object, right? The type, and it's nil, right? You can put it as nil. You don't have to initialize it because this is an optional type. As you know, optional type, you can simply call it nil. You don't have to do that. Sounds all good? All good. So now here's the trick. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to initialize the apartment. So initialize it, and let's call this, since I live in Seoul right now, I'm gonna call this Seoul apartment, call it var, and then let's call it apartment like that. Okay, so you've created this apartment object, but of course there's no property here, right? I mean, you have not initialized this human property, so even though there's an apartment, the human property, all right, there's nothing, right? There's no value to it, just an optional value. But here's the thing, but this time you're gonna call it human, and here we go, you're gonna enter something, and the value you're gonna enter is human. You're gonna create this object called Bobby or Bobby Lee, whatever you want, just put your name on it. Okay, now the Seoul apartment human has been, that human property has been initialized with this object, with human. Okay, so now here comes the magic happens. All right, drum roll please. Anyway, let's get Seoul apartment human. Here we go. We have this called say hello method, right? 1, 2, 3, boom. Did you see that right there? Okay, I'm gonna show you one more time. The human dot. Let's get the name here, right? Take a look at this. Focus. 1, 2, 3, boom. Oh, what happens? What's happening? This thing is being added automatically And let's take a look at why this behavior occurs in the first place. Well, if we take a look at this, human actually is a property of apartment, and this is an optional type. So in Swift, what happens is if anything is optional type, the question mark is automatically added after, and indicating that what comes after may not exist. And also the fact that human property is also optional. It tells two things, right? Human property is an optional type, and also what comes after can be nil. Here's why. So right now, human.name is definitely probably Bobby Lee. Let's take a look at this. Let name equals human.name. Sounds so good. Now we have a name, all good. It's gonna have Bobby Lee on the right side, but the problem is this is an optional type. So anything comes after optional will be optional. Why is that so? Well, here's another example. Let's say like there's an apartment called New York City apartment. I lived there for my college. It's pretty expensive, right? So New York City apartment if you try to get human.name, what you're gonna have is nothing. You're not gonna have anything, right? Because there's no value, there's no object associated with human property, so it's gonna have nil. So if to anything that comes after optional property will possibly optional value. So if a human contains nil, there'll be nil. The name gonna be also nil as well. So anything that comes after optional type, the question mark gonna be nil. Okay. So here's the thing. Again, there are two ways to go about this. There are two ways to unwrap this. The first way we talked about it, we talked about it in the very first lesson. The first one is forced unwrapping. Well, we can do something like this right there. Instead of putting a question mark, you put an exclamation mark right there. So now the type of name becomes string automatically. Okay, so all good. So you're able to work with this name, all good. Everything's fine. So if you put an exclamation mark, anything comes after will be non-optional type because you know that human will exist. But here's a problem. What if you try to do something like this? Human exclamation mark dot name. Again, you can see this problem. Found nil while unwrapping an optional value. Well, if you know human is optional type, right? But you're not allowed to convert nil to normal type using for nil. We talked about it in the previous lesson. You're not allowed to do that for nil value. Normal type definitely need to have value associated. So you're not allowed to do that. So this is forced unwrapping. And we can simply use now implicit unwrapping. We can use implicit unwrapping. Unwrapping means converting optional type to normal type. We can simply use the conditional statement. You can say if lat, let's call it resident name equals New York City apartment dot human dot name print resident name. And if name is nil, just say no name available right there. So right now, if you know apartment dot human dot name will be nil, right? Because you have not initialized. There's no value for human. There's no value. There's no object associated. But if you decided to New York City apartment dot human dot, let's assign an object like this. Let's call it Bubbly. And then now here comes Bubbly right there. Resident name, print Bubbly on the bottom. And if you do not initialize it, no name available. But the good thing is not gonna crash, right? It's better than using this way of unwrapping it. No, that's a no-no, right? We don't want to use this. Is not the ideal case. We don't want to use this, right? We always use implicit safe unwrapping. This is a better way to go about. So don't use it, okay? I mean, there are times you want to use it if you want to make something real quick. Right, this is pretty long and this is pretty short, depending on the context of how you're programming. But most of the time, this is a safer way to go about, and this is the right approach. And but sometimes I certainly use forced unwrapping, but when you are 100% sure that the value exists. Okay. Anyway, Hopefully you guys understand by now why these things are automatically added. So this is literally just optional property, and if you click on it, UI color is a type, just a normal, just a type, just optional property, and anything comes after will be also optional, right? So if you wanna, you can also do this, but it's gonna crash, I believe, yeah, because there's no value. There's no value. Anyway, so hope you guys learned something new. Let's see you in the next lesson.
Boom. So you've learned optional chaining provide like a shortcut to access nested properties and methods of an object. By the way, if you hear some sound of cars coming on the left side and right side, I'm sorry about that. I got a new studio here right in the middle of the road, so hopefully I can move out soon in the future. Let's go back to optional chaining. However, those question marks are added to a property whose type is optional to indicate that anything comes after could be potentially nil, thus optional value. In the next lesson, you will learn how to use a guard statement to safely unwrap multiple optional without using classic if let, and you'll discover why you use guard statement instead. Again, if you want to learn how to increase your productivity when it comes to coding, make sure to check out those articles I posted in the lecture notes. See you in the next lesson. Bye.